Jurisprudence continued. Mr. Fleming, Mr. William Fleming, let loose with a vitriolic tongue-lashing of the judges in the trial, stopping short of labelling them cowards for abdicating the responsibility and accountability for adjudicating on the legality of Micronet brain implants to the International Parliament based in New York City. Mr. William Fleming, in true to form style, went on to say, "We stand here as representatives of society, all of society. We are the human society, and a question as profound and far-reaching as the one before their lordships today was dealt with without regard to the future of our human society. They say that they did, but did they go far enough, in my opinion, to slap these three scientists about the knuckles of their hands and forbid them to continue their freakish practices is insufficient and impunitive. We need legislation to make sure these three scientists are not themselves copied by other so-called well-meaning scientists trying to do the same ghastly things and claiming ignorance of the decision of the court in this case. And why shouldn't they? This court has said it cannot do anything but make its judicial opinion known to the executive, who alone possess power to invoke the legislature. What good is that, I ask you? None. Because people, especially educated people, I tell you, have short memories. Give them 1 year, and I grant you they will be back at it again, but this time quieter, sneakier, and stealthier, and before you know it, that which we the people feared will be born into this world for eternity. We need laws, enforceable laws, right now, to curtail the spread of these macabre practices in our society. Both morally and legally, this is unacceptable behaviour and detrimental to the first principle. We want protection now, and I believe I am not vain or speak out of turn when I say that I speak for everyone here today, on the steps of this courthouse, and those of you at home or around the world who have no voice to let your leaders know what you want of them. Don't be shy. Are you? Well, I will tell them for you. Let the politicians act, and act with haste. We have an international parliament. Let us use it, or what teeth it does have will be lost in the flesh of an enemy too big for any court to ever sink the teeth of the steel jaw of the rule of law into, let alone digest, if Micronet brain implant technology is permitted to grow unchecked." Silence floated around and around, then throughout the 100 or so people on the steps of the courthouse. There amongst them, flanked by reporters and spectators, was William Fleming, defiantly standing there midway up the steps, arms akimbo, cheeks flushed, lips pursed, and slightly pushed forward in total indifference to any objections. The Sky Network reporter was utterly speechless. She never expected William Fleming to make such a poignant and controversial speech. She wondered whether her luck had changed, and she would be famous now, as a crude, cynical smile appeared on her face. This was being broadcast around the world on cable, on direct service lines and internet service provider networks, including broadband and streaming and good old-fashioned radio. Then a hear could be heard from a group of spectators on the steps near the bottom. A faint outlaw it could just be heard, getting louder and louder. A cheer went up, another, and then a clap and another cheer, More clapping, a scream, and soon the entire steps of the International Court were a mass with cheering, screaming, clapping, and boisterous crowds that began to swell each time the reporter beckoned his cameraman to swivel his lens 360 degrees. The clamour and chanting of outlaw it, outlaw it, outlaw it was so infectious that soon all the streets of central Luxembourg were filled with throngs of very audible and equally demanding civilians, echoing the words of William Fleming. Not that they really understood his agenda, for he was a georealist, and their ways are the ways of functionalism, something quite different in essence from liberty, freedom, and protection. News came through that the scenes in the streets of Luxembourg were the order of things throughout the Western Hemisphere and parts of the 5 continents where technology could inspire what occurred in Europe. Within days, like a bushfire, the calls for legislation reached the ears of the politicians. Scholars have argued through the ages that the demands of the people, when in such insatiable flux, defeat even the most subtle designs of high-minded politicians, that they too become subordinate to the will of the people and must do the people's bidding or risk killing democracy and permanently soiling the cloak under which they veil their political self-serving deceptions. Those who argued this were proved right. By Christmas Day of that same year, the Unlawful Body Enhancement Act 2024 was brought into force. Amongst other things, it made research and experimentation into Micronet technology illegal and punishable by life imprisonment and confiscation of research and all results of experiments undertaken if convicted of carrying out or encouraging any experiments falling within the overly broad ambit of the section covering brain implants. This section was a special addendum to the mandatory worldwide legal prohibition against cloning, which was the purpose of the law. As is said elsewhere in this chronicle, the world felt immensely proud of itself on that day. Egos. On hearing this news, the Taljards immediately packed and went away from Avignon in France to the United States of America to live in San Diego, Southern California. Whilst in America, Dr. Jürgen Taljard, after deep thought and unbeknown to Jalomina, performed a minor operation on 18-month-old Diana Taljard, placing the sole Micronet brain implant he had created inside the brain of their only child. Shortly after, Dr. Jürgen Taljard received a letter from the court requiring him to be present at a date and time where the local sheriff would be executing a warrant of distress against items listed by the International Court and stipulated for confiscation. He complied with the court order, but said nothing of the Micronet brain implant that had been implanted into their baby's brain, until after the sheriff's bailiffs had executed the court order and left their house with his life works in tow. Then he fell into the sofa and began to sob tearfully, like a child who had lost all his toys, with no promise of ever finding them again. He told Jalomina what he had done. With thinly veiled angst in her voice, Jalomina replied, "Oh, Jürgen, as saddened as I am at what has transpired, truly you should not have told me, for now I am complicit in your tragedy, and now neither of us can protect our baby Diana. She must be sent away at once, for she is not safe with us any more, as they will watch us now to see if we breach the court order or break that new law. I would die before I allow them to take my only child." Dr. Jürgen Taljaard did not argue, and 18-month-old Diana Taljaard was sent away to a small village called Esperanto, which was situated 20 miles outside of the tourist resort of Cancun in Mexico. Eduardo Tapp, the Taljaard's trusted gardener at their residence in San Diego, Southern California, received their full instructions. He smuggled baby Diana across the border at San Isidro, making his way to his home village. There Eduardo Tapp raised Diana as his own. He awaited word from the Taljaards that it was safe to return Diana to them. Dr. Jaco Coetzer sat in his home in a tiny suburb of the Transvaal in South Africa, gazing into the mountains in the distance. The clouds crowned each mountainous pinnacle, and the misty picture it created seemed to hold the doctor in a melancholic trance of desolate inconsolability. It was now winter in Europe, but the breeze was not so cold in South Africa, just light and fresh. Still, he could not come to terms with what had happened at the Luxembourg court during the Christmas season. The court order was delivered to his house and placed on a table before him by his cleaner. He looked at it and turned away. He knew he would have to open it at some point, but he couldn't bring himself to do it right now. Not when he was feeling so low. In Kenya, Dr. Kunda Maninga had further fortified the secret research centre. The sealed containment unit housing the two-headed leopard Shira was disguised. The actual unit was hidden behind an array of extremely high carved rock sheet walls. Dr. Kunda Maninga had gone to great lengths to send invitations requesting Dr. Jaco Coetzer to join him there so that they could consider the future and other alternatives together. He had always pointed out to his friend that in the matter of great problems, two heads would always be better than one. Dr. Kunda Maninga considered this to be a problem of the gravest magnitude as the court order was finally handed to him by one of his employees. Dr. Kunda Maninga sent a note to Dr. Jaco Coetzer telling him that life went on and that he should remember that in the past it was he who was quick to let go and move on to pastures new without little regard for the foundations he had left behind. He called his friend and spoke to him on his cell phone. Dr. Jaco Coetzer was polite and cordial, all those things required of a professional, but in the background and between the silent pauses between words, Dr. Kunda Maninga could hear defeat, despair and disillusionment whispering away at the psyche of his friend. For Dr. Jaco Coetzer had fallen in love with his works. Finally, he had become the greatest of the early 21st century's body enhancement scientists, save only for the great Jürgen Taljaard himself, and now his heart was rendered asunder at the impending loss of his works. In desperation to avail his friend of this woe, Dr. Kunda Maninga suggested that his friend appeal against the decision of the International Court on the grounds that the trial judges were wrong because they knew too little about the scientific area of micronet brain implant technology to be able to come to that decision. In addition to that, it was unfair to apply religious canonized law to a scientific argument of fact and not one of the beliefs in the fact of the technology. Dr. Kunda Maninga enlisted influential friends and acquaintances from the international science circles to advise Dr. Jaco Coetzer that he ought to visit a brilliant barrister at Lincoln's Inn in Chancery Lane, London, England, by the name of Keith Penrose, QC. He, they said, may be able to assist him, because this barrister was a highly regarded person in international law circles. He also had a strong professional relationship with a tough-nosed American attorney who worked out of a Chicago-based law firm who specialized in constitutional, company and corporate law. He was also well connected to some particularly important people, so he was not easily daunted when the time came for him to ask difficult questions of exceedingly difficult people and organizations. Dr. Jaco Kutzer's mind flew backward to the court scene that day, and he remembered his lawyer referring to a British barrister in the same vein as his friends now mentioned him. But still, he was lackluster and wan, preferring to mope around the confines of his home, gazing like a broken soldier does when he no longer has the stomach for war. After 2 months of prodding and more prodding and a smidgen of cajoling, finally Dr. Jaco Kutzer agreed to visit this so-called brilliant British barrister. After all, he mused, to himself, nothing ventured, nothing gained. The appointment was arranged for early spring at the Lincoln's Inn home of Keith Penrose QC. On the morning of his departure, Dr. Jaco Kutzer awoke early. He packed some clothes and a few files relating to Micronet brain implant theory, which he had hidden from the sheriff's bailiffs as they executed the confiscation order. He also put a copy of his essay, The Micronet, into a plastic sleeve and carefully packed it into his suitcase. He headed off to London for his appointment with the English barrister. The drive to Johannesburg Airport was long and hot, and Dr. Jaco Kutzer arrived late afternoon after leaving his home at 4 a.m. His flight was scheduled to take off mid-evening South African time. He eventually boarded the South African Airways 747 jumbo jet bound for London Heathrow Airport at 6 o'clock in the evening. The plane was scheduled to arrive in London mid-morning. During the flight, he listened to some music and ate his evening meal of lamb chops, broccoli and cheese crackers with a glass of South African red Shiraz wine. After 2 hours, he undid his seatbelt and went to the lavatory. 2 hours later, he had not emerged from the lavatory. Nobody had noticed that he had not returned to his seat because he sat alone. It was not a busy flight, and the fastened seatbelt light had not been activated by the pilot during the past 2 hours or so. There was no need for the air stewardess to do a mental head count of the passengers. Eventually, the in-flight service came around to offer each passenger beverages and an evening snack before the lights were turned off. The flight attendant then realized that the passenger at seat number 36H was not in his seat, and she could not readily recall seeing him in his seat at any time in the past 2 hours. She asked the passengers in the seat behind and in front if they had seen that passenger. They confirmed that they had seen him get up and go in the direction of the lavatory and at the rear of the plane. That was a few hours ago. They had not seen him return to his seat. The flight attendant immediately requested support from her colleagues, and they began a search of the plane looking for Dr. Jaco Kutzer. First port of call was the lavatory area. They used a special set of keys to open the doors to the lavatory from the outside. There was no trace of Dr. Jaco Kutzer. He had vanished. There was no evidence in the lavatory to suggest that he had even used it. The incident was reported to the captain, who logged the details and informed the passengers that they were to be aware that a passenger may be unconscious somewhere on the plane and in need of medical assistance, and if he was located, they should inform a member of staff straight away. However, nothing emerged. Nothing at all. 5 hours later, as the plane came in to land at London Heathrow Airport, ground security was alerted, and the plane was immediately searched for a body, clues, or any sign of his whereabouts. Dr. Jaco Kutzer's luggage was retrieved and opened for traces. The only items uncovered in the suitcase were clothes, toiletries, and 6 old-timer classical music compact discs. His disappearance was an absolute mystery. Word came to the international science community of the disappearance of Dr. Jaco Kutzer. Their loss was lamentable and heavy, for they had nowhere to lay flowers and no body for the weepers and wailers to mourn by, and no grave, if he was indeed lost to them, to hold prayers by, to show their final respects for a man whom many loved and many more admired for his brilliance, his carefree spirit and pioneering nature. All that remained was a jumbo jet 747 on the Heathrow Airport tarmac that had to resume its flight schedule within 2 hours, or risk being fined by the travel tour operators. Consequences. Dr. Jürgen Taljaard and Jalomina Taljaard became increasingly aware of their vulnerability from the moment they had sent baby Diana away. They began to harbour deep concerns about an impending doom. These were compounded further on learning the news of the strange disappearance of Dr. Jaco Kutzer. It was now impossible to convince them that they were not next. Dr. Kunda Meninga was also now in fear for his family and his own safety, and had sent word to the Taljaards via mutual confidants, pleading with them to swiftly make their way to Kenya. He assured them that they would be safe in his company, in the secret confines of the research centre, and that although he and Dr. Taljaard had not seen eye to eye in the past, the events of the past year had taught him humility and acceptance, and he would like now to become a true friend to the Taljaards, and for them to become familiar and friendly with his family and their lifestyle. Of this, Dr. Jürgen Taljaard turned to Jalomina and said, "If it were not for our loss, my heart would say, let us be gone from here. But my spirit is too heavy with grief for the loss of our beloved baby, Diana. I do not doubt that your feelings, though independent of mine, have not much less in common with mine. I, for one, am loathed in going so far from the soul of my daughter. But I will understand and implore you to consider the Meninga's invitation. What say you, my beloved Jalomina?" And Jalomina answered her husband, her eyes deep in tears and her cheeks sullen and paled brown like coffee with too much milk. She shivered with the thought of the choice before her, and snivelled like a pauper queen whose last hope of independence had been lost. Her soul was heavy, and her spirit could not suffer the anguish of being separated from her husband, and she looked upon Jürgen and pondered whether what he did to Diana was good or bad, and whether it was an accursed thought which caused Jürgen to declare that which he had undertaken to her. She stared at him, long and hard, and in her mind she wished more so now than before that he had not told her, so that she could also now be far away with her beloved baby in her arms, caressing her little lips with her fingertips, and whispering undying loyalty to her as she looked up at her with her glittering little innocent eyes and disarming baby smile. How harsh, she thought, as her life then flashed before her eyes. All the promises, all the smiles, the words of her father and mother, and her pretty front garden of deep red roses around her childhood home in Montmartre, Paris. It all seemed so far away. As she ran her right hand through her hair, each finger taut like the spines of a comb. Diana Tapp, she said to herself, do you take this man to be your... These visions drifted back into her mind. Then, as a true wife does, she forgave Jürgen for what had befallen, because she knew that although conceited, he was honest to his creed and knew no alternative, and her eyes softened toward him as they again looked up upon him as the tears streamed from her eyes. And she said to him whilst panting, her heart beating out of control, Jürgen, words between us fall like confetti adorning both our minds, like the time of our marriage and our first vows of togetherness. Lost too am I in this cruel maze, and yes, but for the soul of our baby, beloved Diana, I would be gone from this place, but her soul is still so young, so incredibly young, and even if there is the slightest chance that it may yearn for our comfort in our dreams, I will be so very reluctant to leave this place, as are you. If die we must, my beloved husband, oh how I love you so much. Let it be together and close to our child, so that our spirits have not too far to travel to watch over Diana's living. So it was that the Taljards refused the invitation of the Kenyan doctor, and so sealed both their futures, for fate had arrived to join hands with destiny, and together they both shed a tear for the unfortunate Taljards. On Independence Day in that same year that the Taljards had refused the invitation from Dr. Kunda Maninga, the American people celebrated independence from the British on the 4th of July. The Taljards were newly arrived in that great land and felt obliged to share in the festivities. They did so in silent contemplation and spent the day walking slowly through an elegant San Diego shopping mall, window shopping, and watching the performers and the cheerful children sing songs of future patriotism to the stars and stripes. As Jalomina and Jürgen passed Nordstrom department store, they were approached by a group of 3 individuals who appeared to be gang members, unusually far from home. They wore bright red shirts, baseball caps and bandanas. Ostensibly, they wanted Jalomina's Versace gold chain and Jürgen's Gucci gold watch. Dr. Jürgen Taljar quickly stood between them and Jalomina, explaining to them that he did not want any trouble. But there was one, the leader it seemed, who was intent on creating an altercation. He was stocky, but short, with dark, cold, heartless eyes that betrayed all who trusted in him. He persisted, and then from beneath his sponsorship emblazoned biker red leather jacket, he produced an oil-black machine gun. The Taljards found themselves encircled. Their screams for help were drowned out by loud vocal cussing and swearing and blood-curdling threats. Lithely, Dr. Jürgen Taljard shoved the smallest gang member of the group to one side, breaking free from the encirclement and grabbing Jalomina's hand in the process. He rushed past the other two and ran toward the Nordstrom department store entrance with Jalomina in tow. They were fast. Their assailants were caught wrong-footed. Quickly he switched positions with Jalomina, pushing her ahead of him and urging her to run as fast as she could into Nordstrom. Jalomina was in shock. She wanted help, wanted to scream out loud at the top of her voice. But she was in shock. Her voice, for the very first time in her life, eluding her. They could hear the gang members calling to them, shouting behind them now. Neither looked back. They just kept running. Jalomina was just inside the entrance to Nordstrom. The shouts got louder. Jürgen followed closely behind her. Jalomina was in shock, but she felt safe. They were safe. Her mind told her. Her heart continued to beat frantically. Her breathing irregular. A shout louder this time. They were closer now. But we are safe, she told herself. A short burst, then a long screeching sound akin to the rapid fire spraying motion of a machine gun. Gunfire, her mind told her. Now Jalomina screamed, loud, at the top of her voice, her lungs bursting. The sound of gunfire was too close. She daren't look. Jalomina had never been frightened before. But she had to look. She had to. She needed her husband, his embrace, his warm, comforting arms around her. She was scared. She turned, and there was Dr. Jürgen Taljard, still running toward her, smiling. Why, she thought. She called to him. Jürgen! Jürgen! Oh, my darling! I thought you had been shot. You're safe! You're safe! Screamed Jalomina, her composure no longer a part of her measured Parisienne vernacular. Jürgen, smiling, eyes bright and cheeks flushed red, grabbed Jalomina's hand with his left hand and squeezed it tightly, he thought. His right arm flailed at his side, but Jalomina felt the lack of strength in his left hand, and she lied to herself. He is fine. Jalomina, my darling wife, I will always love you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Be safe, my love, be safe. I am so cold. Hold me, hold me. I will watch over Diana easily now. He spoke with difficulty between coughs and slight convulsions. What? What do you mean, darling? No, what do you mean? You're not going anywhere. No, you cannot leave me. Jürgen, no! Cried Jalomina Taljard. As she looked at his face, she could see the blood forming at his mouth. His expression suddenly went blank. She embraced him with all her might and tried to hold him up as his body began to slump. His entire weight was upon her now, as she continued to call his name softly, then steadily louder and louder. Jürgen! No, somebody help us! She screamed as his weight became too heavy for her. She gently eased his bent body to the tiled flooring in the entrance of Nordstrom. As his body reached the ground, it twisted slightly. She saw 3 machine gun wounds in his lower back. She felt a faint pulse. Hope. She needed a doctor. The irony. She needed medical help right now. She was not going to lose him. There was hope. Her right hand was stained red with her husband's blood. She was sweating. The sweat was dripping into her eyes. She wiped her forehead with her right hand, and she nestled Jürgen's head in the cradle of her left arm. Now her face was red with blood like an English fox hunter after the kill. She bent her head and kissed him on his lips. Hang on, my darling. You will be fine, she whispered into his ear. His eyes began to close. He was shivering. She immersed her whole body against his. She needed help. At last the security guards from Nordstrom, firearms drawn, came rushing toward her. Hope! Finally, she thought. It was like slow motion to Jalomina, but in real life, events were unfolding in a split second, concurrently, juxtaposition. Suddenly the guard stopped. She looked up. She could see their faces from where she knelt. They saw hers too. A lost look in her eyes, a soul waiting to be shattered on a precipice. She followed their eyes to the approaching gang members and turned her head back to the security guards one last time. Then she looked at Jürgen. He seemed at peace. The ringleader was first to approach Jalomina, his eyes cold and bereft of love. No, no, he is dead. Leave us alone now, Jalomina screamed at him. Bitch, why did you run? Was his only words. Once again he produced the machine gun, pointing it at Jalomina's face. She was tired of this. Jürgen was dead. Hope was dead, she told herself. At that moment she remembered that she was Jalomina Pardo, de la Maison du Avocat. She looked at the barrel of the machine gun, defiant and full of pride. Gently she closed her eyes and pressed her forehead against the point of the barrel, awaiting her execution. He pulled the trigger. Click, click. The machine gun jammed. Jalomina opened her eyes. They were full of emotion, an overwhelming emotion of pride. She stared at him, cursing him in her mother tongue. Coward! One day our daughter will find you, and you will wish you were never born. He said nothing in reply, as the others came up and encircled them. Jürgen was slumped on the floor with Jalomina knelt by his side. They handed the ringleader an automatic pistol. He took it, checked it, and pointed at her again, his shooter arm straight as a sword. Bang! 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 Brutally, both Jürgen and Jalomina Taljard were slain. 2 bullets to each other's head and a further 2 through each one's heart. They died in a pool of their own blood and lay there as the murderers grabbed Jalomina's Versace gold chain and Jürgen's Gucci gold watch and bolted off toward the east exit of the shopping mall. The murderers were soon apprehended as the getaway car, a black Porsche Boxster, crashed as the Taljard's killers tried to enter the I-405 north. They were brought to justice quickly. They were each convicted of the crime and sentenced to death under the Californian State Penal Code, but they were gang members, and cynical as it may seem, such faces were prevalent on death row, and nobody knew or cared, so nobody saw when those faces were swapped or went missing. So ended the lives of the early 21st century's most brilliant scientist and his gifted wife. No tears were shed for them in San Diego, for they were new to that city, and tragedy such as that which befell them was all too common in the southern half of California. But a massive funeral dirge steeped in tears and sorrow was the order of the days, weeks, months and years following the news of their deaths in Montmartre, Paris and Avignon, southern France. If from the loftiness of grand design does humanity descend into deceit and destruction, then this is merely a reflection of our real world. However, the seeds of change were sown, for fate and destiny cannot be thwarted by the machinations of powerful people merely through money and influence in dark places. Hope. 3.5 years passed following the San Diego tragedy. The infant Diana Taljard grew quickly in the little Mexican village of Esperanto. Eduardo Tapp did his best to tutor young Diana. Eduardo Tapp did his best, as I said, to tutor young Diana. He was aware of what had happened to her parents, and although he had no proof, he remained adamant that he knew why it happened. He had sworn to the Taljards that he would take good care of Diana and protect her with his life, and to this end he began by giving Diana his family name, the name of Tapp, which Diana was to use forever after. He also knew that there was a risk that Diana might develop problems different from those of children of his own age group. This would be the case until Diana reached 32 years old, per the research findings of her father. Dr. Jürgen Taljard had placed a Micronet brain implant into the left side of Diana's brain. The operation was a minor one, and it involved an incision, just under the skin, 7 meters from the eye socket. Diana was 18 months old at the time of the operation. The effects of the Micronet brain implant were not expected to reveal themselves until she reached 5 years old. That time was near. As Diana approached her 5th birthday, it was 5 days away from her birthday. Eduardo sat outside their home in the little pueblo, watching as Diana played with Enrique, Miguel and Paula, all of them local kids and childhood protégés. All looked so innocent and untouched by life as they laughed out loud and ran around playing football until their jerseys, shorts and boots were thick with the dusty mud of the makeshift football pitch at the front of the house. Eduardo thought to himself how strange it was that Diana hadn't even questioned who her real parents were or what had befallen them. Eduardo got up and walked over to the well in the middle of the courtyard where his grandmother, Maria Mencon Tapp, sat perched on the circular bricked rim of the well. In her old age, she had taken to drawing water from the old brick well. She was sure that slowly drawing up the water in buckets helped to keep her fit and delayed her rheumatoid arthritis from gripping her body and leading it to its deathbed. She knew Diana's secret. She had dressed the tiny wound daily until the scars had faded. Finally, Diana's hair covered any remaining scarring. Then, as time passed, the hot Mexican sunshine had cured any further discoloration, and Diana's skin became golden and without blemish. Only 2 people on earth were aware of Diana's past, soon to be one, as Eduardo's grandmother's frailty of limb got the better of her, and by the middle of March of the following year, Eduardo's grandmother lay dead, slumped against the brick wall of the well, with the rope twined around her hand and a bucket of water half full, swinging to and fro like an antique pendulum near the top of the brick well. Before she had died, Eduardo had raised the question of Diana's past with her. "Mi abuela, you know it is soon approaches the 5th year of young Diana," began Eduardo. "I know, Eduardo. My mind has not left me yet," snapped his grandmother. "I am sorry, mamita, but Diana needs to know where she came from, so that when she starts to evolve, she will not be astonished at her own unique ability. Should I tell her today? That is what I am really trying to ask you. Should I?" he asked. "Eduardo, fate and destiny brought Diana to you. Can't you see? She has been safe for almost 4 years now because it was her destiny to be safe. Now she will be 5 years old. Look at her, Eduardo. Do you see her panicking? She answered. No, responded Eduardo, but I see you panicking or beginning to panic. Calmate, Eduardo. Fate and destiny will reveal itself to Diana when the time is right. She may even ask you before you ask her. She said. Do you think so, mi mamita? Enquired Eduardo, seeking a sliver, if anything, of guidance. I know so, Eduardo. Let's not speak of such things again. Let us simply enjoy Diana's 5th birthday and thank God she is still playing free and innocently, replied his grandmother. You know, I believe they still search for her, continued Eduardo. But a child that young disappears so easily, Eduardo, she answered. I know, mi mamita, but once she reaches 5 years old, it will be difficult to keep this little Mexicana a secret from the outside world, explained Eduardo. You live with little faith and hope in the Lord our God, Eduardo. At 5 years old, Diana will be unstoppable. If it is as you say, what does it matter? Who knows then? She asked. It does, because she still can be vulnerable if certain people find out about her existence. By 8 years old, she will be able to defend herself, but until then she is very vulnerable, said Eduardo, the parental concern evident in the tone of his voice. We'll see. Trust in fate, ended Maria Mencon Tapp, her penultimate comment regarding the matter. Dreams. On the 15th day of April that year, Diana celebrated her 5th birthday in the little pueblo. She had a party to celebrate, and the old viejo musica played long and loud into the night, whilst the old people drank tequilas and talked nothingness until dusk. By this time the children were long asleep in their cabanas. Diana slept soundly that night until 4 a.m. As she slept, the Micronet brain implant in her head finally connected with her brainstem. Inside her brain, the nano-sized modem flickered green, and a link was established to the extra storage space between the hybrid brain cells which had been developing over the last 4 years and her brain's normal cognitive ability. A green light, ever so fine, ever so thin, shot out of the side of her head, searching out an electrical power supply in her room. The light switch offered the sliver of green light a passage to the mainframe of the local electricity network grid. It seized its opportunity like a baby crab scurrying to safety before the tide comes in and washes away many of its siblings. The modem had finally gone online. Information came streaming down the green film of light, and during the night of Diana's 5th birthday, all the information about anything she had ever wanted to know about in her brief years on Earth was downloaded from the network mainframe into her mind. In her subconscious, she asked herself about Mommy and Daddy, and immediately the history of her parents was downloaded, relevant records, and of course the news clippings of their slaying. Once this was downloaded, Diana stopped downloading and screamed, a sharp, frightening scream that shocked Eduardo out of his drunken stupor as he lay, perched, half asleep, on a rocking chair on the front porch. He jumped up, hastily headed toward Diana's room. His grandmother saw him out of the corner of her eye, and she said, in her croaky, tired voice, "Hey, Eduardo, Fate and destiny have arrived. Go, quick, and comfort her, for she needs you now. Her final words on the matter. Eduardo opened the room door, and his first sight shook senses he had thought were unshakable. Diana was sitting up on the bed, with data scrolling through her eyes. The sound of Eduardo rushing into the room and causing the wood flooring to creak eerily caused Diana to stop suddenly. For the first time, Eduardo really stared at her eyes, and said out loud, "My young Diana, what beautiful eyes you have. You have. I am sure your eyes were not as beautiful as that yesterday." Diana seemed oblivious to the compliments. She slowly faced Eduardo directly and said, "Papa, come and sit by me." Diana said this with a mature, confident tone in her voice, in a manner quite different from how she spoke the day before. She gently tapped the side of her bed by her right thigh as if to make it comfy for her papa to sit. Eduardo went over and sat so that Diana's head could lean against his shoulder quite easily. "Papa, I call you, but I know you are not my real papa. I know that you knew my real papa and mama, but you are still my papa. If you want, I have two papas, but papa, that's not really true, is it? Because one of my papas is dead, and my only mama is dead too. Papa, I am so sad, because I never knew them." Tears fell from Diana's eyes as she spoke to Eduardo, and the wetness of the tears soaked the shoulder of Eduardo's white cotton shirt so that a sad wet patch appeared, and Eduardo felt the wetness against the skin of his shoulder. He felt saddened by Diana's terrible discovery. "If only I knew how to make things easier for her," Eduardo thought. "It saddens me so deeply to see my young Diana in this way. Oh God, please save her and teach her salvation through your light." Eduardo said this prayer in his mind. A moment passed. Then to Diana he turned and said, "Chica, Diana, fate and destiny can be kind and cruel, and although you have lived with love all your days, those who have loved you have paid heavy sacrifices. Papa, you won't pay a sacrifice for loving me, will you?" asked Diana. No, Diana, don't talk like that. Somos familia." "We are family, and we will be together for always." "Oh, good, Papa, because I have something to tell you." "What is it, Diana?" "I don't know how to say it, but I know everything I need to know about anything that ever bothered me." "What do you mean, mi muchita?" "I know why toad spawn is found in puddles and shallow ponds and not in the lakes or rivers. I know the name of every star in the sky above our house." Eduardo politely interrupted. "Do you, Diana? Blessing be to Dios for your new abilities, Diana. I have something to tell you also." "Papa, I am sorry for screaming. It's just that I saw pictures of my real parents and..." "Calmate, mi muchita. What I have to say is important. More important than your screams. Diana, you are special, very special. One of a kind, you are. But you must not tell anyone. Only I and your grandmother know, and now you know." "Okay, Papa, but why?" "Because if you tell anyone or others, they will tell others, and so on until everybody knows your secret, and you won't be able to play or run around safely anymore. Do you understand?" "Si, Papa." "Diana, have you ever heard of the internet?" "No, Papa. Is it like fishing net?" "Yes and no. A fishing net catches lots of fish, and we feed off those fish. Some we eat, some we put back into the sea. The internet catches information in a net. Information like your name, the capital of Mexico, a map of the Americas, and so on. Does that make sense? Kinda, Papa. You found out about your natural parents because the internet search you cast brought all this information into your mind, like the way the fishing net brought all the fish onto the boat, and from the boat to this town for us to eat. The fishermen pick out some types of fish, the fish you and I enjoy eating, and throw the unwanted fish back into the sea. Your mind picks out information it needs and throws the unwanted information back into the internet, or back onto the World Wide Web, as they sometimes call it. Are you still with me? Eduardo asked. Just about, Papa, replied Diana. Nobody else in the world can do what you will be able to do. The information you fished for is stored or kept in your brain. Do I have a small net in my brain then, Papa? You could say that, Diana, but they call it a micronet. Your micronet gets information from the internet and stores it for you to use whenever you want. Diana, this makes you powerful, so now you need to learn how to be responsible. Remember, don't tell anyone how clever or smart you really are until you have learned to control your power, warned Eduardo. Should I flunk my school classes, Papa? I find them boring anyway, asked Diana. No, sorry. My fault. I did not think. You see, Diana, you don't need to go to school anymore because this morning you learned everything a teacher could possibly teach you. You need guidance, and that is why I am here for you. Remember, you don't need to rush. Take your time and all will become clear so that you understand. Even now, just looking at your beautiful eyes, I know that my time tutoring you is almost over and that you will be very soon making big decisions on your own, observed Eduardo. Mama and Papa were murdered, Papa. I have made some decisions already, like I am going to find out who did it, replied Diana, with an adamant look on her face. Gang members, didn't you get the news clip from the download? Responded Eduardo half-heartedly. He was also sceptical about the circumstances surrounding the death of the Taljards. Yes, Papa, but I don't believe it. I just have a feeling that it wasn't so simple, a feeling like there was something else to my parents' death. Papa, I don't know how to explain it, said Diana. That's interesting, but besides that, Diana, your parents loved you so much and your father gave you this gift, and it seems that they both paid for it with their lives, so please use it wisely. And come to me if you are in any doubts, reassured Eduardo. Si, Papa, claro que si. Yes, it is clear, replied Diana, her eyeballs looking very heavy indeed. The conversation ended and both, while still seated on the bed, embraced and squeezed each other tight. Diana buried her head into Eduardo's chest. Eduardo managed a tear or two, not uncommon for Mexican men of his stock. When they had finished, Eduardo tucked Diana into bed. Diana closed her eyes. Eduardo kissed Diana's forehead and stroked her long, curly hair away from her eyes, and left the cabana. The floor creaked as he walked through the doorway, gently closing the door behind him. As he left, Diana's eyes switched. Data started scrolling through her eyes in binary format. She had learned quickly. She went online, located the best web games, and began to play them. Whoa, she thought to herself, this is so cool.